This is Mary Maxine Likes to Talk with me, Mary Maxine. This is a series dedicated to talking about all the fun facts that I find fun, factual, and that I like to talk about. In this episode, Mary Maxine likes to talk about the Titanic. This episode may contain coarse language. Listener discretion is advised. Alrighty, folks. The Titanic. I will be talking about both the disaster, of course, and the 1997 cinematic adventure starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. I've been somewhat obsessed with the disaster since grade 1-ish. I first read about it in an encyclopedia and could not believe the hubris of man. The unsinkable ship sinks. Obviously, I didn't know what hubris was or irony, but I knew it was ridiculous at the very least, and I couldn't stop learning about it. I was 6 or 7, so I was pretty jazzed about most things back then, but especially shouting, "Iceberg! Right ahead!" Then the movie came out in 1997 when I was 8, and I wasn't allowed to see it in theaters. My grandma tried to sneak me in and get us in, but of course it was sold out. We did eventually buy the double VHS set, and it was so very often that my sister or myself would be like, "Should we watch the second half of Titanic?" And we just put in the second VHS. And Titanic is such a quotable movie. Can I get you anything? Is there anything you'd like? He's got the iceberg warning in his fucking hand, his hand, and he's ordering more speed. And I put the coat on her. I'm the king of the world. I have a child. It's been 84 years. And who hasn't even ironically belted out My Heart Will Go On by Canadian treasure and musical icon Celine Dion? My number one favorite disaster, the Titanic. The RMS Titanic was a British passenger ship operated by the White Star Line. The Titanic was captained by Edward Smith. RMS means Royal Mail Ship. It was the largest ship on the ocean at the time. It was 882.5 feet long and 92 feet wide. Height from keel to the top of the bridge was about 104 feet. Titanic was the second of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners, the other 2 being the RMS Olympic and the HMHS Britannic, all 3 the ideas of Bruce J. Ismay and J.P. Morgan. Yes, that J.P. Morgan. Bruce Ismay sailed on the Titanic and survived the sinking, whereas J.P. Morgan canceled his first-class ticket at the last minute for unknown reasons. This has led to many conspiracy theories about whether it really was the Titanic that sunk or sister ship the Olympic for insurance purposes. It's actually a pretty good argument, though for the record, I do believe it was the Titanic that sunk. Titanic was constructed in Belfast, Ireland by Harland and Wolff to the tune of $7.5 million, or around $166 million today. Titanic's center anchor was the largest ever forged by hand. It took a team of 20 Clydesdale horses to pull the 16-ton anchor. Titanic's power plant produced more power than the average power station at that time. The 3 main engines weighed 38 tons each and had a combined output of 46,000 horsepower. I'm not sure if that's horses swimming or running. A first-class ticket would have cost $4,375, which is around $100,000 today. Titanic departed from Southampton, England on April 10, 1912, headed for New York City's Pier 59. On her Atlantic crossing, Captain Smith ignored 6 iceberg warnings that came in from other ships. A lifeboat drill for the 14th was inexplicably cancelled. 6th Officer James Paul Moody answered the call from the crow's nest saying, "What did you see?" And it was Frederick Fleet who famously announced, "Iceberg, right ahead!" Just 37 seconds passed between the sighting and the collision of the iceberg. She hit the iceberg on April 14th at 11:40 p.m., completely sinking at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, 1912. It has been suggested that had the Titanic hit the iceberg head-on, it may have stayed afloat, or at least long enough for rescue to arrive. 2,224 passengers and crew were aboard the Titanic with 20 lifeboats. Capacity for 1,178 people. 706 survived the sinking. Most lifeboats were launched at around 60% full. Only 5 were rescued from the -2-degree water by the surrounding lifeboats, though there was room for around 500 more. It was the Carpathia who answered Titanic's distress call and made it there by 4 a.m. It took another 3 days for the Carpathia to reach New York City. The youngest survivor, Melvina Dean from England, who was only 9 weeks old at the time of the disaster, was also the last survivor, dying at 97 years old on May 31st, 2009. A special survivor was the stewardess Violet Jessup, who survived the sinking of both the Titanic, the Britannic, and was aboard the Olympic when she was rammed in 1911. Just a month following the disaster, a movie was made starring one of the survivors, Dorothy Gibson, a first-class passenger and actress. 333 bodies were pulled from the water, most buried in Halifax at the Fairview Lawn Cemetery. Maritime safety laws were created in response to the disaster. Boats had to carry enough lifeboats for every soul aboard, and 24-hour monitoring of communication systems were required. There are interviews with real survivors available to watch on YouTube. These are incredible stories. I highly recommend going to check them out. Look up Ava Hart. On to the movie facts! James Cameron, quote, didn't necessarily want to make the movie, I just wanted to dive to the wreck. He dove down a total of 12 times for the movie. The movie cost more to make than the actual ship adjusted for 1997. The ship was around $166 million, and the movie cost about $200 million. It was the most expensive movie ever made at that time and was the first to reach the $1 billion mark, initially grossing $1.84 billion. The highest grossing film of all time until James Cameron's Avatar in 2009. Rose was almost played by Gwyneth Paltrow, Winona Ryder, Claire Danes, Gabriel Anwar, and Reese Witherspoon. Kate Winslet lobbied hard for the role, sending James Cameron letters from England and a single rose with a note saying, I am your Rose. The initial choice was for Jack Dawson to be played by River Phoenix, though his dying in 1993 made that difficult. Tom Cruise's acting price was too high, Jared Leto refused to audition, and Johnny Depp turned down the role. A full-scale model of the starboard side was built at Baja Studios in Mexico. As the Titanic was docked on the port side, any and every shot of the ship in port had to be shot backwards. Writing had to be backwards, cast had to walk left instead of right, Rose's buttons were on the opposite side, her hat was tilted to the other side, and every shot flipped in post-production. One of the first scenes shot was the drawing Rose naked scene. Kate Winslet flashed Leonardo DiCaprio when they met to break the ice. Inappropriate. Me, not her. It was James Cameron who did all the drawings in Jack's sketchbook, including the drawing of Rose naked. There were so many takes of Rose spitting in Cal's face, she ran out of saliva and had to resort to lube. The couple laying in bed together as the ship goes down are supposed to be Isidore and Ida Strauss, the owners of Macy's department store in New York. Ida inspired the line, "Where you go, I go," which she said as she refused to enter a lifeboat without her husband. Kathy Bates played the unsinkable Molly Brown, a moniker the real Molly Brown got after surviving the sinking. The scene on the back of the ship as it goes down, there's a chef of sorts next to Jack and Rose who takes a drink from a flask. He is based on the chief baker who credits his survival in the frigid waters to the alcohol. That does not endorse drinking alcohol and going swimming in frigid waters. Celine Dion recorded My Heart Will Go On in one take, so the version at the end of the movie and eventually released is technically a demo. That's how good she is. My Heart Will Go On has been covered by Neil Diamond, Sarah Brightman, an instrumental by Kenny G, and of course, Miss Piggy. The scene set in 1912, the whole movie except the opening and closing credits and the present-day scenes, have a total runtime of 2 hours and 40 minutes, the approximate amount of time it took the Titanic to sink. In the scene where the man says, "Hold Mummy's hand and be a good little girl," these were the real last words survivor Ava Hart's father said to her before the lifeboat she was in was lowered. And finally, on the last night of shooting in Nova Scotia, a good portion of the cast and crew were drugged with PCP, a powerful hallucinogenic. One crew member was demanding to see a priest, the director of photography was leading a conga line, and the assistant director was talking to Cameron over a walkie-talkie while looking straight at him. The perpetrators were never caught. Now, the most jarring scene in the movie, and that I do think is pretty accurate, is the scene after the ship sinks and the camera pans back and you see the hundreds of people in the ocean screaming in the dark. And I can imagine the screams just slowly fading, turning to moans, turning to silence. The ship of wonders rendered to rust on the ocean floor, once a graveyard, recently turned into a disastrous tour attraction. I'd rather go to space than go to the ocean floor, just for that record. Like, some creatures in the ocean look like they've come from space. Look up the big fin squid and tell me that's originally from Earth. It's ridiculous. It looks like one of the pods from War of the Worlds. There's 1,000 reasons I'll stay near the surface if not just on land, and squids are one of them. Whales are another. They look sweet and I think they mean well, but they're like big dogs who think they're small. I don't want to be accidentally crushed. Anywho, thank you for listening to Mary Maxine Likes to Talk About the Titanic. What is your most learned about disaster? Or if you're weird like me, what's your favorite disaster? If you have any fun fact topics you'd like to hear about, leave a comment and let me know. Mary Maxine Likes to Talk, available for your ear holes on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, Podcast Addict, and marymaxine.ca.